Alrighty. Firstly, thank you for joining us today. This has been a bit of an interesting ride for the last couple of years for Brenna and I and Hans in terms of the routing working group. We've started out as a group that started talking about, well, let's talk about routes that are going weird places and why are they going weird places and should they be going weird places. The group has grown beyond that. We've been collaborating on how to fix faults, how do we actually make use of our international resources, especially when we identified that, hey, you know, if we could just go through KAUST, this would save us a lot of trouble. And then KAUST brought on a link and suddenly everything was great. So little pieces about, this comes back to the whole week we've been talking about the community and being able to build upon our resilience and our reliability by working with each other. So this working group is very much about that. So today, we're going to get a routing security update from Thomas from Internet 2, and then we're going to do a little bit of a subgroup information and update. We're going to ask for some updates from people randomly in the room. That's it, you're all on notice. I did ask a couple of people quietly, nicely, that they might answer some things. Others, I'm looking at you. You'll answer just because you're nice. And then we're going to have a general discussion. We're going to talk about manners a little bit, because it couldn't be a talk from me without manners being mentioned somewhere. And we're going to talk about previous cases. And then one of the things that we really want to get from you guys is tool talks. We had a lot of success with tool talks over the last few years. And we want to hear from you about what are the tools that you want to hear about next and who we could invite to come and talk to this group. So with that in mind, I just want to remind people of what this group was founded for. And it was established to create a community to work on international routing issues to improve RNE performance. The goal is to engage network owners and NRENs to not only reactively discuss and address ineffective routes, but will also work to proactively engage the community to create policies to prevent these from occurring. Now, have we succeeded in this? I think we've been doing pretty well at it. We've been able to point out a few points where it's like, hey, you know, you're sending traffic in one direction, but it's coming from another direction. Is there a way that we can improve the latency? Is there a reason you're sending this way? So with that, I'd like to welcome Thomas, our first speaker today, and let him talk about routing security from Internet 2's perspective. Please welcome Thomas.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Thomas Araneta. I'm from Internet 2. A lot of familiar faces here, so it's great to be back at APAN to do another short talk. This talk was originally developed by Steve Wallace and Jeff Bardig from Internet 2. If you guys know Steve is our Director of Routing Security, so he's been heading up several things. RPKI and manners have been one of them. ASET, which we're going to talk about today, is another. And also, you know, one of the things we'll talk about too is kind of what's our plan here. So essentially the agenda is describe the future states of REN peering. As you know, the REN peering has always been very open, has been able to enable a lot of flow between RENs and NRENs. But it comes with its own challenge, and that challenge is particularly route leaks. And then we'll talk about what we're proposing as an intermediary solution to remediate this problem. So just for your awareness, networks like JON, ESNet, and probably others, if you do, please raise your hand if you're already kind of living in this future state so we can learn from you about best practices. So I want you guys to guess what that picture is up there. Okay, David looks like he knows, but that is the GREN. That is the networks that we live in. So if we're looking at it from the outside in, those green dots are the networks at the very edge, the stubs, so to speak. The blues are kind of the NRENs or larger RENs. And then those red dots and the thick lines in between, those are the backbone. So that kind of brings us into this definition, is that what do we consider NREN, at least for the context of this presentation? Those are the national networks. Internet 2 would be one, SURF, SING, AREN. Backbones, those are inter-NREN connectivity. JAON's probably a good one to refer to. APAN, Internet 2. But collectively, all of us together, we are the GREN, and that is 2,700 autonomous system numbers in 107 countries. And that probably has gone up since this presentation was last given. And that's about 18,000 IPv4 and v6 routes being originated from the GREN itself. But in terms of redundancy in path, we have Internet 2 at least. We see at least 2 paths per ASN. So that gives a lot of credit to the work that we've established for the last several decades for connectivity. So this is kind of just a general map, a normal looking map, not like the one we saw earlier. But if your country's not on here, please let us know so we can update this. But this is what the GREN looks like today in terms of footprint. So a little bit of context for what has happened in the United States, how we got started. In 1997, there was StarTAP in Chicago, and that was kind of the first real exchange point to aggregate connectivity between the NRENs. Some of the advantages obviously were direct peering, right? But it came with its own cost. Hairpinning traffic, so if someone wanted to go to Latin America, they had to go to Chicago first, right? It was also expensive, but everything network connectivity at the time was expensive. But then again, we got better. Internet 2 offered ITN, or International Transit Network. So, you would advertise your routes to us, and then we would re-advertise it to our peers. With that, we use BGP communities, and we still use these BGP communities to control routing announcements. So if you wanted to have a local pref, higher or lower in one place, or you didn't want to announce something to a certain network, you would be able to do that. That kind of became the norm. The international peers established it, and what this resulted in is in the resiliency of what we see as the GREN today. Many networks have multiple paths because we're all just sharing our routes with each other. But in terms of route filtering, we're not really doing that, and that's kind of the problem. JAON's a special exception. We can talk about that later, but that's not really the point of this talk. Is that the problem we're facing is that the GREN is very susceptible to route leaks. We saw, I think, at least twice in 2024, someone leaking commodity routes into the GREN, forcing traffic to a certain direction to another network. And what that led, at least on the Internet 2 side, was to completely kill that peering, and they lost connectivity until they resolved the problem. So because they made a technical mistake, they lost traffic through the United States. That sucks, really, right? RBK and ROAs don't actually fix this problem, but what does fix that problem is ASSET. ASSETs, they're built in IRRs, so like RADB, APNIC, LACNIC, they are probably the most ones that you would use. And then what essentially is that it's just a list, it's a point of reference, say, this is my ASSET, and then in this ASSET, these are the ASs that I connect to and I have routes to. So it's a form of trust that you build through the IRR. What's great about it, it's only really necessary for the aggregation network who's going to re-advertise upstream. So a stub network, they don't have to actually do anything. Here's an example of an ASSET. This is ours for I2PX. If you don't know, I2PX is kind of our commodity network that we have. The name is AS-all. And that the members, this is the AS cone here, is AS participants. And this is coming from RADB. And then if you look in further to it, this is everybody who's in the AS cone, AS participants. And this refers back to all those other AS sets. So this is kind of a recursive technique to say, who do you peer with? Okay, and then they peer with them, and they also peer with them. So it creates a strong level of trust, and it's very clear where a route is supposed to come from. Or an AS is supposed to be learned from through these paths. So in terms of making your AS set known, like if you were to peer with us, in the export line, you would say to AS any and announce this AS set. So for us, you would do to AS 11537 and announce this AS cone itself. This QR code here, since you may not you may get this presentation later, but if you want to have it now, that'll take you to Internet 2's requirements for making its networks known. So that way you'll say, okay, this is the policy that we have for it. But in more of a general, more standard way, peering DB is probably the best place to do that. If you worked in the peering world, if you go peer with somebody, you go to peering DB first, and that gives you all the information you know. And IRR ASSet is one of them. ASSet, if you have the route objects enabled to it, you can also create policies around it. So that's one of the flexibilities that are available. So this tool right here, BGPQ4, this is recommended by RADB. But essentially, from the command line, you can query the ASSet and then create configurations, a prefix list through it. So it's quite flexible in that way. So if you're trying to think in automations terms of how you're trying to scale your network but also secure it, the opportunities are there for you. So in the state that we're trying to get to in the very near future is that the NREN community, the GREN, adopts ASSet and enables filtering. Now, I'm not saying filtering like we're going to block routes from NREN so-and-so for policy reasons. So no, it's to protect ourselves and to prevent these route leaks so that way we don't have the fragility that we're experiencing most recently. So, but to get there, we need a plan, and this is kind of this plan that we're proposing, and we would like to work on. And I think it provides the flexibility and gives people the time to understand ASSet, work with it, and experiment with it. So, the first stage is, of course, preventing this propagation of leaked routes. This is really where we think things have to end. And then the second path is guiding and shepherding the community to build ASSets and then to work with us on it. And by doing so, giving them a higher local preference. And then lastly, transition to being ASSet-based filtering routing. Sorry, that kind of sounded strange, but transition to this ASSet world where we can have conversations about better policies for routing. So in that first stage, what's that going to look like? For starters, Internet 2 will take a snapshot and of routes that we know to be true and trusted from this community, and then to build a single prefix list, disperse that across the routers that peer with international partners. And then this way, we know that there's no more leaks that will occur. If you accidentally advertise, say, a route to AWS or to Twitter, it won't come through us. If it does get to us, it'll stop there at the border of our network. And that, we would either periodically review this, which I don't think is the right approach, but instead let the community come to us and say, hey, we just brought on this new /24, can you add it to the prefix list filter? Do you guys know who you would have to reach out to for that at Internet 2? So you can reach out to me, or you can reach out to the NOC. Either way, or Steve Wallace or Jeff Bartig, we're all happy to help and maintain this going forward. In the next stage, we would see that people start building the ASSets. And once we know the ASSet is good, it's stable and trusted, then we would increase the local preference on that peering. We would still learn the other path. However, that path is really for backup purposes. We want to use the ASSet path as the trusted and stable path. And lastly, stage 3, we're all in the same place for ASSet. We can turn away from that prefix list and move on and have new conversations about filtering. Stage 1, that really is that can be done sometime this year, realistically. It will take a little bit of time to understand the routes we learn, the changes in prefixes count from different regions. And then stage 2 to stage 3, I foresee that being a very long time. And we're happy to work with the community. We want to ensure not only that, Internet 2's network is secure and stable, but also that the GREN as a whole is able to move forward in this direction. And Internet 2 would like to help be a part of that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Alrighty. I'm going to steal this. So before Thomas walks away, any questions for Thomas from anyone in the group? Okay, yes. Come and stand and grab one of the microphones. Sorry, there's one just here.
Sata-san, you were late.
And for
you were also late.
That's a round at the bar later.
Sorry, Alan.
Yeah. Introduce yourself, sorry, Tashi.
Yeah, hi. I'm Tashi. I'm with my NSRC hat on, not Flex Optics. Thank you, Thomas. Great talk. Just a few quick observations. Lots of generic AS sets, non-hierarchical AS sets both in the Gian's AS set name, and I was also looking at your member AS sets within your AS set. Name collision is a real problem. I could go create an AS set that looks like any of those AS sets right now, and BGPQ4 would pick the most recent AS sets if you're trying to query those. So my first request would be, let's go with a hierarchical AS set, like the one I saw. Your own AS set was very hierarchical. It had your AS name, and then it had your AS number, and then whatever was the name that you
I agree.
wanted. Yeah.
Absolutely, and Steve has been talking on the APAN on both the mailing list and on the Slack channel very much about that fact. But it is a known security risk, so yeah, absolutely.
And I think that also warrants that we should have discussions as a community in terms of standardization, right? We may all speak English and all speak routing, but we are going to do things that are not standard, or we're going to do things quickly, and we should be working together and having these conversations very often to understand that naming convention is a critical piece. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. Cheers. Thank you.
Out of curiosity, who here, just raise of hands, who here peers with Internet 2 directly as an NREN? Just raise your hands. Okay. So each one of us has to work with Internet 2 on this. And I just want to come back to a couple of things that Thomas alluded to, and I'll just call out a few things that I would just highlight here. If you're in the the AER or the APO net, you would have heard me say IR is shit. I just want to repeat that statement. And I'm going to say it for this reason. What Thomas alluded to is using the regional internet routing registries, which is authorized. That is the key. I just want to really pull that out and make sure that people understand that. Without using an authorized registry, anyone can create anything inside of Merit, inside of RADDB, and so forth. Now, the problem that comes, and this is where it becomes really interesting for us as NRENs, is that inside of APNIC, AREN, all of those entities, it's very hard to get your customers to create ROAs and to create route industries and to create the WHOIS information and bits and pieces that you can then utilize for AS sets. So I just want to call out that it's beyond just that, in that we have to work to get the customer to do this, and that will help uplift things, because if we rely on what's in RADDB or Merit, unfortunately, it's just going to be garbage in, garbage out. And so if you look at Hurricane Electric, we were talking about this the other night, Hurricane Electric, Cloudflare, those people, they are all very much clear that the first thing they do is they go, does the route match a ROA? If it matches a ROA, it passes. They don't care. Does the route then match one of the 5 RIRs? Okay, now we've got something to work with. Then it follows through a process. If it's in the last of the bottom, as they call it, then it goes through a process and it gets evaluated and looked at and treated as the worst of the worst. It's a best effort. And so that's why I just want to really call that out, to say, make sure that your information within your regional routing registries is correct. Now, some cases, there are sub-registries, and so you need to work with your sub-registries. I just want to be aware of that as well. But they're some of the things that you really need to focus on. The other part that I would also call out is everything that we do is about uplifting. If each of us puts in a filter and starts to filter our routes, there's an improvement. That doesn't mean that it's a silver bullet either. You can still leak a route even with an AS set, because the problem being is that you can have community tags that say, in your policy, I will permit this and I will pass it on. And that has happened in the past in the NREN community. And that's some of the things that we also have to be aware of, is that what the IRR policy says versus what sometimes our configs say don't always align. And that's the other part, is actually actively reviewing your policy on your router as it's exiting. You need to be actually going, what route, why is that route leaking? Should that route be leaking, or why is it being denied? Like, there should be a check that you're doing just to make sure that your route hygiene is correct. Now, the reason I call this out, and it's only to plug Manners for 2 seconds, I promise, is that's part of the reason that Manners looks at your routing table. It goes and has a look to see what you're doing, are you doing the right things, and checks to make sure those validations are there on your side. But are there any other questions for Thomas? Because we've got a lot of time to kill today. And, oh, Brent.
You mentioned your desire from the Internet 2 perspective to help those. Is it just those that peer with Internet 2, or are you looking to work with emerging NRENs, smaller NRENs, or is that service only things that you're looking to assist, like for people that are actually peering with you?
Well, what's going to happen probably is that the ones who peer with us are going to say, well, we all, our downstream needs help. How do we go about this? So, these are conversations that we need to have collectively as a group. And like what Warwick's saying here is that this is a multi-step process of verification, and that we need to work through it in the right way. Say, this is the AS that we trust, and did you follow these steps, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's probably going to be everyone coming together in large forums.
And a follow-on that I'll add to this is also, it helps that your whois data is actually correct with a contact detail or a contact name and a phone number. I don't know how many times I've looked at the international NREN routes and I've seen entries for whois that for a person who retired 20 years ago. And I've got no idea who to contact now as the right person. So then it's hey, Internet 2, do you know who this route comes from? Could you contact them? And then could you get them to contact them, to then contact them, to then contact them, so that we can try and get to the end person who's actually ultimately responsible for the route. And so I come back to every year you should be at least reviewing your internal routes and saying, is the whois up to date? Have you made sure that it's got the correct abuse email, a phone contact, or an email address? Like if you don't have a phone number, I really don't mind. But if you have an email address, at least there's a way to communicate and go from there. Any other questions for Thomas? Yes, please come forward. Oh, push up. Yep.
This is Akira Kato from White Project. I have been working to write the RADB information by myself for a decade ago, but I do not. So do you have any good tool to consult with the current description and the BGP table and find out the mismatch?
I don't. We can figure it out though.
Yeah, if such a tool available, then that would be great to fix it before applying.
So just run that past me 1 second again. Mm-hmm. So you're saying you're looking for a tool that looks at what you're announcing on the BGP to the world and tells you what is in what is in IRR versus what is not in IRR versus not inside of ROVs, etc.
Yeah.
I can tell you honestly, there is a great tool by BGP, Hurricane Electrics. They have a website. I'll show it in a minute, in fact. I'll show you, and if you give me your ASN, I'll show you. I can give you that example. It's a great way to check. There's also Cloudflare. A number of different players have this, but it's a great way for you to go and check yourself.
Thanks, Warwick.
Okay, right.
No worries.
And for other information that APAN is trying to update the app use whois entry in every 6 months or something like that?
That's correct. Yeah,
So,
they have a request that they send out. So when I say a yearly, that's you just doing your check, but they're going to ping you every 6 months to make sure anyway. Right. But it's just you should have in your own processes that you're checking yourselves.
Yeah, so everybody need to check.
Absolutely.
Critically, right? Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Don't you hate it when you just close the window you needed? Bear with me 1 moment. All right. This is a presentation by Murphy's Law, so if anything goes wrong, it wasn't me. Okay, so this is the Hurricane Electric BGP tool website that I was referring to. I would highly recommend that you guys use this when you're wanting to have a check of things. It's a great little place to go. So if you could just give me your ASN. Your AS number? Yes? 2500. Okay, so this gives you a fairly detailed bit of information. But what's really useful is that you can see here that the RPKI, you are doing really well. No invalids. So I call that out and say, well done. But what you'll find here is you can look at your prefixes here, you can see what's here, and there is a raft of information that you can actually pull up. But what is really interesting is over on the top right, if you look at all the tabs, there is the IRR, and this is your RADDB entry. Now, again, this needs to be inside of one of the real routing registries. I just say that that's your task. For the next time we meet, please move it over there. But inside of here, this shows you your entries, but what you can do is you can go to your prefixes, and on a prefix by prefix case, it will give you these ticks on the right-hand side. You see the green? And on the green, it tells you that this is saying that the route entry has a valid IRR entry. That's a great start. Then, the even better start is when you come down here and go, oh, there's a row where it's signed and it's valid. So you can do this for any entity. If someone wants to give me another AS. No one wants to embarrass themselves? 7575. I knew my boss was going to call it out, so let's go. All right. Now, bad. Now, there are a couple of things that I will say that are really interesting about using these tools. These tools are based on information that are gathered from looking glass pickups. So there's a couple of bits where there will be some data that will make you go, oh, are we, aren't we, what are we doing? In this particular case, you can see here, this particular /22 shouldn't be appearing under our system. Unfortunately, this is a bug. Not on the Hurricane Electric system, but within our routing policy generator. This is exactly what Thomas was talking about. I want to use this as an example. So these are the things where we need to actually go through and say, well, what do we have to do to fix these up? And so this is where I have to then go and pretend to be a programmer, and I'm sorry, I play in Bash and Awk, and that's about it. But the person who wrote this code in Perl, most of you will remember Bruce Morgan. Bruce has retired, so now I'm trying to understand what he's done within his Perl scripts to come to this point, and so we're working through it. But the thing is you can go through here and you can see a whole bunch of things, and you can see that there's all the green ticks, there's the rowers, all that sort of thing, but then there's the occasional one where it's saying, you know, if you look over here, visibility, 1%. Generally speaking, what that means is that at some point, ARNet has announced the route, but then we've withdrawn it and no one's seen it since. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. Some of the universities have handed back IP space. Some of the universities have sold that IP space to others. There's a couple of bits and pieces. So for those that aren't aware, in the last couple of years, APNIC has gone through and done a reclamation of historical space. So if you didn't actually put your hand up and say, I own this, they basically said, okay, we're pulling it back. So there's a few bits and pieces. All right, who else wants to play the bingo wheel of AS number? Come on, this should be a bit of fun. Who wants to have a go? 23855. 23855, like that? Yep. All right, let's have a look. NREN. NREN is doing really good on the no invalids. That's good. Let's have a look at the prefixes. 100%. Well done. It's like, when you're small, it's easy. That's the way I look at it. But the good thing is and let's have a look. Hey, winner, winner, chicken dinner. Your data is in APNIC. That makes your data really actually valuable. And I just want to call out, this is the interesting part now. I will also point out, if I go back and I embarrass David more for a moment, as NRENs, we've been around a while. And this is where it gets really messy, is when I go back and look at ARNet's IRR, we are in RADDB. Now, I just scroll. This is how complicated it gets when you have 35 years, 8 months, and a couple of weeks of history of data. And then we have APNIC at the bottom. We've at least got one bit done. This is what we're working on. And this is why I bring it to your attention to say, this is not a small task. This is really a big job for all of us to do. And if we're a sizable NREN or a small NREN, it doesn't matter. The job is still the job. We've still got to actually do it. And I can't highlight enough that I'm standing here in front of you telling you guys to do this, and I'm also pointing out that we are just as guilty as everybody else. So please take the message home. This is something that's really important. We all have to work on it. Any questions? Okay. With that, I will change over to slides. Just give me a moment. Alrighty. Now, Brenda, did you want to run through this bit, or would you like me to do it? I can do it if you want. Have a go.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brenna Mead. I'm with Indiana University. We operate Transpac. And as was mentioned, Transpac has been part of APAN for about 30 years. I've been the chair of the routing working group for about 3 years, along with Warwick. So as Warwick mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, initially we started looking at routes that we would consider erroneous and work together to try to solve those problems. So things like traffic from Asia to Africa traversing the US, traffic from Asia to Europe traversing the US, things like that. So routes that are taking ways that are not efficient, causing performance issues, things like asymmetric routing. And as a group, we've got about 170 members on the mailing list, and we have 20 to 30 people come to our monthly meetings each month. However, it's a community group. So what we're looking to do, in the first year or so, we had a lot of cases. We've had about 25 cases that we've solved. But in the past year, those cases have slowed down. I don't know if that's because we're all doing better at our BGP configurations, that we've identified this as a problem and everyone's working together, or if the community is just not contributing those issues to the routing working group. A lot of the things that we found are me digging around in looking glasses, in NetSage, in route views, things like that to find cases. So Warwick and I and Hans sort of thought to ourselves, well, what can we do to get some more engagement in the group, bring people back, and get those conversations started again? And we started looking at what the community needs in terms of routing education and what we can do for the community through this group. So we decided to start looking at some smaller subgroups within the routing working group. So we've created 3 subgroups: BGP training, so that's Hans, Jeff Bartig from Internet 2, and Davidson from PacWave. Their focus is going to be putting together some BGP training materials and working on getting those training materials and doing face-to-face trainings with junior to medium level engineers around the NREN community. That is the goal of that group. The second group is routing security, which is Steve Wallace from Internet 2, and I believe you as well, Warwick. Sorry, I missed your name. The goal of that group is things like this, to go and talk about manners, go and talk about what Warwick just went over, the understanding your route tables, understanding routing security. How can we help you get to manners, get to RPKI, things like that. The third one is creating common definitions. So as something that was mentioned, I think you kind of touched on it. People can just name things anything. And a lot of people don't understand the terms that NRENs use. A lot of people don't even know what an NREN is. or much of the terminology that we use that is sort of nomenclature to us, but maybe not to them, or to junior engineers that are just joining the NREN community. You know, how do we make sure that what we're really thinking about here in terms of our subgroups is how do we make sure that the junior engineers that are coming into our community understand what they're doing, feel trained and ready to run these networks, and have a place to have a community to grow in and to work with so that they can understand what they're doing and have success within the NREN community and grow in themselves and their careers. So that's kind of the goal of these groups. Currently, these are just the leaders of the groups. We are looking for people who are interested in participating in these groups. Many of you sitting in this room are senior engineers, are pretty high up in your organization. And the people that we're really looking for, I think, in some of these groups and to get more involved in the routing working group are some of your more middle level engineers or even junior engineers that you see a lot of potential in, whatever, you know, whoever that may be. Those are the people that we are targeting and are hoping that might be interested in either participating in these groups or you know, benefiting from the resources that these groups produce. So what we're looking for is anyone that may be interested in participating in these groups, helping create some of this documentation, or just learning alongside these groups. So if any of you have an interest in that or have an engineer you think might be good for the group or for these things, please let us know. These are really kicking off this year, and I'm going to go into what we did into the BGP training subgroup specifically. So this one got their feet in the water, as they say, last year at Internet 2's Technology Exchange. So each group had to make a charter just so we understood the goals of each group. So the goal of this group is to destemify BGP, promote best practices, and again, foster a community of well-equipped engineers capable of running, maintaining, and optimizing the global research and education network through the effective use of BGP. You know, we always laugh, we say, BGP just works. And that's not necessarily true, and I think we all know that because we're sitting in this room having these conversations. So what do we plan to do? Present on best practices at many conferences, hands-on workshops with virtual labs to reproduce real-world scenarios, documentation of best practices, communities, and more, creating community discussion, which is what we hope to have after I finish sort of talking about this, and creating virtual BGP labs. Oh, I already have that, sorry. Again, those are the current chairs. At a technology change last year, Internet 2 Technology Exchange, there was a full day BGP workshop. The first half, we had I think we actually had 40 plus attendees. So the first half of the day was Intro to BGP with hands-on labs. The lecture portion was led by Corey Eichelberger at TAC, who is a member of the routing working group as well. The lab portions were provided by Jorge's team at the University of South Carolina. If you weren't able to go to that training and you have someone who may be interested in those resources, Intro to BGP, they are available, and I can get you that information, so just let me know if that's something you're interested in. And then the second half of the day was targeted for more not senior engineers, but engineers that have been doing this for a while and want to learn true BGP and route policies for the RNE network specifically. Led by real-world examples. So that was led by Jeff Bartig, a chair of this group, and that was at Technology Exchange in December. So it went over very well, and these are the things we're looking to do and continue doing. So with more of the focus on this second half, not necessarily intro to BGP, but once you understand how BGP works, how do you make it performant? How do you keep your networks clean? How do you keep your networks safe, secure, and avoid route leaks, things like that with real-world examples. So look for more events like these. We'll be doing these hopefully at continued TechX opportunities, potentially APAN, potentially trying to work with you all in the community to identify if you would like to host something like this and partner with us to do something like this for your NREN, or if you know anybody that would be interested in something like that. So come to Warwick and I if that's something that you're interested in. Again, the next steps for this group, we're going to add to this team. So if something that you are interested in doing, we need more people, we need more resources, work on our best practice documentation, and start engaging with groups like NSRC, manners, and others that are already doing work in this space, just to make sure that we're not overlapping and, why reinvent the wheel when we're already doing, a lot of folks are already doing good work in this space. So if you're interested, like I said, join us. So if you are interested in joining the routing working group, we meet every month. We try to rotate our meetings. So 1 month the meeting will be in the morning on the East Coast to accommodate kind of our European folks. And then the next meeting the next month will be in the night on the East Coast to accommodate more of our community members from sort of the Asia Pacific region. Just so that we can get as much collaboration and feel like we can have as much inclusion as possible. We do have a Slack, which which is occasionally very chatty. We're working on cases. We're talking about things that we're seeing in the community. We do have a website, and if it's something that you would like to do, please contact us. Again, if you have sort of junior to mid-level engineers you think would benefit from something like this, please send them our way. We want to meet them. We want them to join the community. We want them to feel comfortable here, and we want to make sure that they feel like they have a place to go to help with any issues they may run into. So we are back to the agenda. I think from here we want to do update from.
Well, I think we'll turn it up a bit.
We'll turn it up a bit. All right, Warwick.
So we'll make this a bit more interactive. So because I'll get to manners in a minute, but we'll start with tool talks. Who here is interested in RIPE Atlas? I see one hand. Come on, there's got to be more people interested in RIPE Atlas. Okay, 2 hands. Well done. We've raised the bar. We had a really interesting conversation with RIPE a couple of years ago where we talked about how RIPE could be used to help us identify these routes and these issues. So I think it would be good to be able to have a conversation with them again and say, hey, let's see how the things have progressed within the RIPE system and bits and pieces. Other tool talks, what are things that people would like to know more about? I heard earlier someone say, what are the tools that could be used to look at BGP, for example? Maybe I can do a tool talk on BGP. I may yet do it here. Just wait. We'll see. James, a suggestion?
Were you ready to hear him?
Absolutely.
I cut you off.
No, please go ahead.
No, there's an activity that we were involved in, Steve Wallace, Jeff Bartik, Carl, and others, where we worked with CADA, which is an organization in the U.S. that does active internet measurement. It's a really amazing lab, and they partner with researchers all over the globe. And so we've submitted a paper, developed a tool leveraging Scamper to do some things that I think is interesting for this group, which is actively discovering when RNE networks aren't taking RNE networks, or RNE institutions aren't taking RNE paths.
It sounds very interesting. It sounds like a definite one.
So basically, we have containers listening on full transit interface and on RNE only, and being able to take intelligence about the network and do an active probe and listen to the responses while we iteratively do more prepends.
Okay.
And so it was astounding that we saw the number of about 9 to 10% that we could affect to go over transit and away from the RNE networks, and in some that were always over the RNE network, or always over transit. So anyway, those types of activities, partnering with people who are actually doing network research, I think. And developing tools or using tools. So for instance, you've got the RIPE Atlas nodes, you've got ARC, which have opportunities to be able to have an impact with some of this type of discovery, so that we can find out when RNE networks are straying from RNE policy with BGP.
Okay, that's fair. I would also ask the group, would it be worthwhile for us to have a tool talk by our colleagues who are doing BGP Watch? I think that would be of benefit to the group as well. Are there other tools or bits that people are working on that they would like to show off to the group and say, hey, here's how we've solved this problem, or other bits and pieces? This is an opportunity for people to shine. Think of it as a showcase. This is an opportunity to say, this is how we've identified a way to solve this problem that we have. Maybe you guys have had it, but we've never spoken about it. That's the sort of thing that we want to promote with Tool Talk. So if you have something and you think of something, please come and talk to me or Brenna and say, hey, we've got this idea, we're thinking this through, this could be really useful. Those are the sorts of things we definitely want to hear about, okay? And I'll give an example, and I'm going to call out to Simon here, because Simon did this a few years ago at APAN, and I thought it was really cool at the time. He showed that perf sonar with a little modification could include traceroute information to tell you what the traceroute was at the time the event occurred, and then what the traceroute was post a link failing. And it was really useful to be able to go, oh, that's where the problem, it went this way. Okay, now I know where to go and dig. And so it's bits and pieces like that. That's what I mean by showcase. Like if you're doing even the smallest little bit, and again, I'm going to pick on Simon because he does this a lot. Simon has been doing work with Netbox and other bits and pieces and his team, to show how we can, to do VLAN tracking and other bits and pieces on international links. Like this is the sort of stuff that we want to bring forward to the team. So if you have a fantastic graphic visualization of how you're monitoring your BGP session or whatever it might be, we are really keen and interested to hear about it from you guys. So if you do have a tool that you think that's important and you'd like us to talk through, that'll be great. The other one that I'm going to call out is, we mentioned before NSRC. We will be asking NSRC to do a bit more of a demonstration of their tooling and their capabilities. I am potentially going to show a little bit of some of their stuff in a moment, but I just want to come back and ask the room, who here is actually a member of Manners today? Hands up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's really shocking. And I know Giant is one, so I'm going to count you as well. So there's a few more that I would just call out and just say, we need to improve that number. Now, I've had a few of you come and talk to me in the corridor, so I'm going to just talk about Manners off the cuff for a moment and just talk through some of the things that people have. People have conceptions about Manners being difficult. Manners is not difficult. Manners is actually relatively simple. The things that people get confused on is the terminology and the language. There are 4 elements to Manners as a network operator. And I can put a slide up if you'd like, but I figure it's probably easier if I just talk to the room. The 4 main elements, and we've talked about this today, is being able to actually do filtering. Can you filter your network? Can you coordinate your network? Do you do anti-spoofing? And do you do some form of route validation? They're the 4 elements. That's the breakdown of Manners. Now, I've had people come and talk to me about saying, oh, we can't become a Manners compliant network because we use a DDoS protection system from a vendor that hijacks our routes and announces a /24 out of our /16. I'm going to tell you that is utter nonsense. You can be Manners compliant with that. The way that works is you create a ROA for your network to announce the large block, but you also create a ROA for the sub block to be announced by your DDoS provider. That is completely Manners compliant. So I just want to get that one out of the way. That is a very easy one to solve. The other thing that I'll talk about is there are a number of different tools that people use. Now, again, I'm just going to raise their hands and ask questions. Who here looks at peering DB? I see a lot of hands. Who here has up-to-date information in peering DB? I see a lot less hands. So I just want to call out, if you are an NREN, or you are an internet service provider, or you do things with transit, you should be in peering DB. You should have your information available. It should talk about your peering policy. In fact, why don't we go and embarrass myself further? Let's go peering DB. And let's go AS7575. All right. I might be in luck because this was updated we updated this last month. So I'm actually going to be impressed with myself for once. So the important bits of information. Now, this is where there's going to be a lot of conversation. So I just want to point this out. The IRR AS route set, this is what Thomas was talking about. This is the bit of information that glues everything together. This says, hey, this is our blocks, this is where we sit. And you might have information in it, as we just talked about, where the names are a bit of a challenge and so forth. But what's really interesting is, Thomas, what is Internet 2's AS number again? 11537. Now, now, that can be fixed. But the point, though, that I'm just using here is to say, you know, hey, we all have to keep going and having a look at this and actually look at it with fresh eyes and say, hey, is this information here? Now, the reason I actually went looking for Internet 2s was because a while back, they actually had a very interesting flag there. It didn't actually have a blank space. It actually had that this data was in RADDB, or it was in this location at the beginning. Now, Simon, what's your AS again? 238. Sorry, 238.
One more plane, yeah.
Thank you. It looked kind of dodgy there for a minute, didn't it? But then you can have a look here and you can see that they've got their entries in here. But what's important, and the reason I call this out, is this is a really useful page of information when you're trying to work out how can I peer with people. The really good one is the fact that they have a peering policy, or they have notes to say who do you contact if you want to go and look. Oh, you want to peer with NREN? Click on this link. This is useful information for us to be able to utilise to contact each other and say, hey, I'd like to peer with you, and other bits and pieces. The other bit that's over here that's interesting is that it talks about public peering exchanges versus interconnection facilities. Now, NRENs are notoriously private. We do not advertise our peering points globally, but sometimes we do. So you can see here there's some interesting bits and pieces that talk about, you know, the speed, the support for BFD, bits and pieces. There's a lot of information that's contained within these networks, within this data. So if you look at 7575 as ARNet, for example, this tells you all of the peering points that ARNet is in globally. And what's really interesting, and this is why words really do matter, you have 6 and you have 6. So there's the Seattle Internet Exchange and there is the Singapore Internet Exchange. And so there are times when you need to be aware of what are we talking about. And so we actually, everyone puts a G in front of it to make sure that it's very clear that it's not the Seattle Internet Exchange, because that was created earlier. Pacific Wave is in here, for example. Scenic is also in here. Actually, Jonah, let's get your AS. What's your AS? 101. Let's go. All right. Now, I'm just gonna point something out. Who here thinks that their IRR information is correct? Yes. No. Is what is written on that page correct? Is there a little bit missing? AS1:. I'm just pointing it out just to say nuances matter. So this is why I want you to have a look at your data. And if you're not sure, reach out. That's what we're here for. We're here to help you guys go through this stuff and give you help to identify where things are. Now, you might have heard me mention before, you know, ARNet's been around for a while. I think Pacific Wave and Scenic have been around for a long time as well. There was at one stage where ARNet was announcing a route on behalf of Scenic. And that created all types of conversations as to who did this and why. And that's where you need the brain's trust to go, well, hang on a second, was there a reason we did this? Is there a project that we're all not watching anymore? Or what happens if we stop? And so these are the things why it's important to go and have a look at what you're doing. So the other part that I'm going to do is I'm going to go over to the Observatory of Manners. Now, you've heard me talk about manners the other day, and I showed you that this was available, and this looks really bad when it loads like this. I'm just going to go, let's try that again. Oh, let's change it back to February. Let's see if it actually gives me some data. Oh, it's doing something. It's thinking about it. This will be really funny if they're doing a maintenance window right now. I think they may be. So, whilst we're waiting for that, who here is interested in actually joining Manners? Who actually sees, all right, let me flip it. Who sees no reason to join Manners? Come on. Who's got a reason not to join Manners? I'm asking legitimately because there are some people who have said, oh, we've got legal reasons. If you've got legal reasons, and you don't have to go into them here, I'm just asking, who has a reason not to join Manners? All right, let's change it the other way. Who here cares about the routing security of the global internet and NRENs? If you're not raising your hand, you need to be in a different room.
I think there's some broken arms in here.
Yeah. The reason I say this is because it is that simple. You either want to be part of the global internet or you don't want to be part of the global internet. We'll try one more and see if it will load. All right, hang on a tick. I will log in and see if that makes a difference because it's not refreshing on this.
May I ask a question?
Go for it.
I want to know how many Tier 1 ISP have joined the Manners.
Pure ISPs.
Tier 1, yeah.
Tier 1.
Yeah, ISP have joined the Manners.
Last that I recall, there was a large number of them. The one that I'm just trying to go through, level 3 was one of them, if I recall, which is now I think Lumen. But there was a large number of them going through it when I was chairing Manners at the time. One moment. Alrighty. And yes, Manners is up. It's just for whatever reason, with my browser it wasn't working. Alright, so I've changed over to a different browser. And we'll just wait for this to come up. And again, in an effort to be completely transparent, this is Araneta's dashboard. So, I'm just going back to February to have a look at what happened in the month of February. So, we can see here that Araneta was not the cause, I'll get rid of that, of any incidents. We were not the culprit, but we had a routing policy. All of our routes were in some form of IRR. That's great. Unfortunately, it's not the right IRRs, but it's a start. In terms of doing route origin validation, we're at 97.4%. We've had drops in our network turned on for the last, I'd say, year, and that's been quite good. You can see here that we have 59 routes that are valid, 122 that are unknown. Now I want to just talk about that for a second because this number scares people when they start looking at Manners. Araneta doesn't own that many IP spaces. I just want to be really clear. What that is if someone has asked Araneta to announce their route from AS7575, i.e. they don't have their own AS number, it appears in this list. So out of that 59, Araneta's routes are about 10 of the valids. The rest is me working with the customers saying, could we please turn on ROAs? Can we please get you guys to do this? So there's a long way to go, but we're slowly moving in the right direction. The things that are important is you can see here the filtering, anti-spoofing. Why is there no data available? Well, interesting enough, James talked about it earlier, there is a CADA project. And in this particular case, you have to run a little Docker container or you have to have a piece of software on your laptop which hasn't been updated in a long time, so a lot of people won't do it anymore, which was the CADA anti-spoofer. If the anti-spoofer was running on your laptop, it would run a test to see whether or not your network was passing spoofed packets. If it wasn't, you would get a really great 100% up here. If you're not doing any anti-spoofing tool, you get nothing. It's just the way of the world. It's a very hard thing to actually test from a remote instance without having something in your network. So much so that we actually reached out to RIPE from Manners and said, hey RIPE, is there a way that you can do this through the RIPE probes? Because that would be really cool. And RIPE said, yeah, we'll think about it. And there's the tumbleweeds going along at the moment. So there's a couple of bits and pieces. The coordination and the routing information you can see is 100%. And as I mentioned, RPKI is at 33%. We're lagging behind because we're slowly getting those customers to uplift. But then if we go and look downstream of our customer base, there's a lot more customers with a lot more routes that have got, some have got rowers, some don't have rowers, etc. Because to be honest, Araneta announces about 500 routes to the internet. Now, it's not from all of our AS, obviously. So that's why I just bring that up. The other thing that's really cool is you can go and look into this map and you can actually go, oh, look, you can look at it from the global view. So this is just showing that, well, where is Araneta? Well, funnily enough, Australia. It's just going through and looking at, bits and pieces. But what you can do is you can go back through various bits and pieces and you can actually go and compare yourself. You can go and get your comparison stats and you can go and have a look at how you're doing in regards to filtering. You can get an idea of, well, hang on, let's have a look at that one. So if we have a look, M3C and M4C are saying that we're not doing the job. So let's go have a look. M3C, bogon prefixes propagated by the AS. That it means that we've learnt a bogon from someone and we've passed it on because we're not filtering it. Now, the problem with this is bogon is a very unique term. It's also a term that is used very differently depending on who you speak to all throughout the world. In fact, the 5 internet routing registries cannot actually agree on what this term means, which makes this one that I'm quite happy to just say I'm going to ignore. But I just call it out so that you guys understand when you look at these stats and you go, hey, what's going on? This is the reason why. If we look at the M4C, bogon ASNs propagated by the AS. Now, this is where I come to our history lesson point of the conversation, and I talk about the fact that we've been around, all NRENs have been around for a long time. Unfortunately, what happens is the person who was responsible for maintaining the contact with the routing internet registry has left the organisation and no one knows who's actually paying the bill. No one's paid the bill. And so we have this, an ASN that is registered, that is valid, but no one's paying the bill anymore, so therefore it's invalid. So what we find is that there are a number of institutions, and for example, Thomas and Steve and I have been working with a number of people in the United States, because a lot of those are in the United States where the person has moved on and left the organisation, and we're trying to then get ARIN to update the data to say that this is actually a valid and real ASN. So this is why this is important. And then you can see here, no spoof packets, all the details were there. Would anyone like me to pull up their ASN? Would anyone like to actually see what they look like? I don't know if I can do it, but I can try. The other thing that I'll call out over here is you have rower stats. And rower stats gives you an idea of, okay, where are we at? And you can see here, as I said, there's an awful lot of IP blocks. Now, these are looking at it from the country, and this is a global view, so you still have to then bring it down to actually look at things at a more lower level. So, for example, Simon, what was your AS again? 23358? 23855. 2355, sorry. Oh, can't do you. All right, let's try Jonah, undefined. 11537. Okay. 1103. Okay, so the answer is, we can try that. Might be the way. Oops. Bad voodoo. Bad voodoo. Ah, there we go. Okay, so it is that. So here we can look at surf. And we can see surf is doing really good. We can also see that there's an unknown for a /48. So some homework. If we go back, all right. Sorry, what was it again, Simon? 23855. There we go. Yeah. There we go. Perfect. Total blue. All right. So this gives you an idea. And this is where you can have a look at your entries. Oh, okay. Yep. And Jonah, well done. All blue. And this is, unfortunately, I'll just point out, the names here are very historical. They are going back 30 plus years. So if you find something here, there will be reasons why they're that old. All right. Now, who here feels that they cannot comply with manners? I asked you if you would not comply with manners. I'm now saying who would not comply with manners. Who here feels they need help with manners?
That's easy.
Yep, nobody. Okay, so the challenge is in 6 months, I want to see everyone list. How would you feel if I was to ask you to all give me your ASNs and I will go and get you a list of everyone who is or isn't a manners compliant partner? And then we can have a chat. Because what's really interesting is if I go to the manners website and I go down to programs and I go down to network operators and I go participants.
In fact, to answer the question before about how many tier 1 networks, I just jumped onto the Wikipedia page which lists 14 networks as tier 1s and 10 of them are on that list.
There you go. There's the answer. This page here allows me to search for any one of you. So if I...
Check the AT&T and 7018.
Which one, sorry?
AT&T 7018.
I don't think they are.
AT&T I know is not.
That's one of the ones that isn't.
NTT. NTT is...
7070. You can check 70. Yeah, this one.
Yes, NTT is definitely one.
Its status is the IPv6 prefix is unknown. There are some IPv6 prefix. The status is unknown.
Yes, so you may find that is exactly as I described before, where they, as a telecommunications carrier, are
Yeah.
announcing a route on behalf of somebody. They can't actually go in and create a ROA.
Yes.
They have to convince the customer to do that.
Yes, I just think that the higher IXP and IS, they should take more responsibility to push all the internet to be more clean.
They are actively. So when I've been speaking to them, and I'm putting aside my Araneta hat here, and I'm putting my manners hat on from when I was the chair. When we were engaging with them, they were actively chasing customers to go and put entries in.
Yeah.
In the same time, we were actively engaging with APNIC, ARIN and others, saying there must be a way that we can get access as a upstream provider of a customer to create ROAs on behalf of the customer to uplift the security of the internet. There was a lot of backwards and forwards within the registry for that. That hasn't yet come about. ARIN has the closest to it. APNIC is still working through it. If that comes to pass, and then we as carriers can come in and say, hey, this route is announced by us. We want to make sure that there's a ROA showing that it's coming through us and it's from this customer. That's that would be great. The problem being is how do you then say that it was authorized by the customer? That's the ultimate challenge, is that the owner of the space or the person who's rented it from the internet routing registries, they have to say that they have said this is right. Otherwise, it blows the whole security of rowers out of the window.
Okay, thank you. Do you think the registries such as APAN59, they can have more power to push all the IXP and IS to be more responsible?
To be honest, no. I don't think APNIC has that power.
They
But
don't have any power.
They have the power in the sense that they have the power of the terms of agreement when you leased the IP space or the ASN, etc., from them and so forth. The people who have the power, funnily enough, is the content delivery networks and the peering exchanges. So peering exchanges for the last 2 years have been talking very much about if your route is not in one of those 5 internet routing registries as a entry, they will not accept it, period. Now, if they do that, that will cause a significant flurry of people to go and register their routes.
Yes, yes.
I'm kind of the opinion that they should pull the pin and do it, because it will force the issue. The problem being is if we continue to be as we are, people are inherently lazy. They will not do it unless someone actually forces them to do it. And that's why it's very interesting when you take the commentary from the keynotes the other day about it's about advocacy, it's about reminding people and bringing people to understand the picture and not talking. I can talk to you about the technical details of manners all day long, but I come back to those 4 points that I started with at the beginning. They are the key elements. It's about, can you filter? Can you make sure that it's up to date? Are you telling people the right information? That's the keys to the Manners project. If the peering people were to pull that pin, we would see that uplift, and that would be fantastic, but we'd also see a huge amount of people suddenly not being able to do something because their data is not held by the people they think it's held by. This is why I come back to it's a recurring loop. The problem being is, as I mentioned before, are you sure that your IP space actually belongs to you? Or does it belong to, or is it registered to a person who's left the organisation but still has their email address and could turn around and remove it in a heartbeat? This is where you've got to go back and look at all of your assets. You've got to look at it and say, should it still have, and I'll give an example. If you do a whois on Aranet's IP space, it'll have Steve Maddox. It'll have our NOC, but it'll have Steve Maddox listed as one of the contacts. Now, should Steve retire in the future? That's fine. But we need to go through and make sure that when he does retire, we update that information with who the next person is, or have a delegated contact that is a mutually shared mailbox or something that is within the organisation that's going to be kept for the rest of its life, if that makes sense. So my advice to you is to go back to basics and go and have a look at your IP space and actually go, well, who is on the whois? Who's the detail? Because if you can't actually answer the request of the internet routing registries when someone says, hey, I'm trying to log in and authorize this because that's the person who's allowed to do it, that will be a problem if the content networks and peering providers actually turn that feature on. But it would definitely change the globe. Other questions? Yes, please grab the microphone. Push to the top.
Hello?
Yes?
Yeah. I just have a question about the role of the participant for the manners. You know, I believe most of the NREN should be just as a network operator. But for example, for the Giant O10, because they are just provide the transit service to the other NREN, so they should be like the XP, right?
No, they should be a network operator too.
But actually, you know, because just on behalf of TNOC, we got the request from GenNOC last year. They require us to provide the AS set of 10 community, but you know it's quite complicated to collect that information. And also last year I also discussed with Sato-san about that. So And I was told by Jen now they just try to comply with the manners XP
Yeah, so-
action. So that's why they request us to file.
Yeah, so
that's why
I think there's a couple of bits that we probably should just explain. So you're right. There is a blurriness there. Someone like Asia Connect, who connects multiple people together, could be considered an IXP. But if you go down the IXP path, there are more rules and compliances you have to do versus as a network operator. And so I do think that it's probably better to treat it as a network operator than it is to treat it as an IXP. That being said, you could comply with either. It's not very hard, but the way in which I would look at it is you could treat Giant that, you could treat TN as that. When Internet 2, for example, could be one of the world's largest IXPs based on that terminology. But again, I do think that it sits down really as a network operator because it operates and provides services. And when I say that, as in transit services, whereas internet exchanges, generally speaking, allow you to just partner between two networks and that's it. There's more to it than that, but again, you could take it whichever way you wish on that front.
Okay, thank you. Actually, we just try to follow the requirement from Giant, not for the 10 community, but because for the 10 community it's quite complicated than the Giant, because for the Europe it's quite we have to meet different constraints. Now we have raised this issue to 10-star CC because we need the coordination from 10-star CC to the 10 NREN to ask for them to provide the instance.
Funnily enough, Patch was going to be here.
Yes.
And he knew that I was going to ask him a question, and so he chose to not be here. I know he spoke to you.
Yeah, that's
But Patch is on my hit list for sorting this out this year. But again, yes, we need to get everybody to start looking at this.
Yeah, while the as from the 7660, so from the APAN for the basis, so the while the manners recommends to have the prefix filtering, right?
So
Instead
Manners is always going to talk about prefix filtering, yes.
Right. So that the so when we start creating those kind of prefix filtering, so that we will rely on the BGP Q4 or something like that, so that it is based on the IR data, which you don't recommend update, in a sense.
No. It's true. So let me just clarify. So for those just hearing the question, so he was talking about the fact of using BGP Q4 to query IRR data to generate the prefix list and so forth, and how I used the word the IRR data was shit in the context of RADDB, Merit and others. That is correct. But you can tell BGP Q4 what registry you want it to query. You control that. You just simply set a flag and say, I want it to query the following, and it will query just the following. So you can actually say, I only want to get answers from AppNIC. I only want to get answers from LANIC. I only want to get answers from ARIN. You can tell BGP Q4 that. You can tell it, I don't want to hear anything that comes out of RADDB.
Okay, so that should we encourage in this community that the to encourage updates the IRR of the prefix on the in terms of prefix.
So if you read through the Manners documentation, it has been updated. We did put in there that we recommend that everyone registers their data in their local internet, regional internet routing registry. So your AppNIC, your ARINs, your JPNIC, and that way it is in a no one authorized state. Then that can be queried.
Okay, so that so that's the basic. There is a foundation as a way to go. So that so that each NREN should have lots of downstream network, right? So that's
yes.
So that they should update their IR, so that we can filter in the
like it's a slow process because if everyone actually put their data into the regional internet routing registries, we would then just simply say, okay, we're no longer going to query RADDB. We would just simply stop. We would stop querying Merit. We'd just simply go, the 5 other places, that's it, done. I come back to what I said before about people are inherently lazy. It takes a long time to get people to do this. This is a problem that the internet's been around for over 40 years. We're going to have this problem for at least another 10 to 15, if not 20 years, I'm going to be frank. But the challenge is there are certain events that will trigger things that will cause us to change our viewpoint. And when that happens, we will see things move along. Other questions about manners? Other questions about BGP, because I can talk about that if you want, or I can not, it's up to you. Out of curiosity, is anyone interested in the BGP training that we talked about earlier? If you are, please raise your hands. Okay. Well, do you have anything you want to add? Pull it up.
There we go. I would just add that our next meeting is in April. Apologize. Our next meeting is April 15th. It'll be the AM session, so 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So whatever that time is in your area. We'll be we're hoping to have a tool talk pending the person's agreement. We also are hoping to have you all, if you have cases that you'd like to bring to the routing working group, we would like to see them. As Warwick said, if you'd like to talk about your routing policy, where you're at in your development of routing policy at your institution, if you're doing anything interesting that you would like to showcase at the routing working group and teach others about, we would love to have you come and talk about it. Again, this is a community and we're here to learn from each other, and we especially if you've already done something or learned something or overcome a challenge, those are the things that we want to hear about. So we'll April 15th, and then we meet every other month unless we are having an in-person meeting. So for example, we have no meeting in June due to TNC, but otherwise we have bi-monthly meetings scheduled for the rest of the year.
With that, thank you very much for your time today. We'll finish up early. If you have any questions, please come and talk to any of us. Come and talk to Thomas if you want to talk about Internet 2's routing policy. Or if you have any questions on routing policies in general, feel free to come and talk to me. I'm more than happy to talk to you about that. Thank you very much, everyone.